Andy Bianco is a dynamic jazz artist, composer, and educator based in New York City, renowned for his performances with celebrated artists like Elle Varner, Angie Stone, and Kandace Springs. With a career spanning international tours and critically acclaimed album releases, Andy's music has been lauded by publications such as Downbeat Magazine and the New York City Jazz Record. Beyond the stage, his commitment to music education shines through his teaching roles and the Philip Bianco Memorial Music Scholarship honoring his father's legacy. So, Andy, good to see you.
Good to see you, Abe. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I came across your name, just because I saw that, you had been playing at some, great venues, all over the country, really, places like Blue and Akron, Ohio,
Yep.
and down in Red Bank. So, I definitely started to see your name, and then, checked out some of your playing and just thought you were a tremendous player. So I thought
Thank you.
that would be a great place to start, just talking about the performing and everything. Um,
Sure.
when you take on a gig, and you're right then and there, do you think that there are any challenges about it? Like, do you just find it very relaxed? Like, or I mean, obviously it's rewarding, but what do you think would see the challenges as performing?
And that's a great question, Abe. Thanks for the question. Are you talking about when I'm in the capacity as like a band leader, like doing my own stuff, or working as a side person, or which capacity specifically?
Leah, what about you as a band leader when you're really taking on the role as the leader?
Sure. This is one thing that I've been working at getting better, working at trying to get better at. The whole idea of the band leading thing, I would say I started doing that about 2016 in New York, where I was like, okay, there was a couple of gigs that I did playing my own jazz music in New York. I did, I think, two gigs in maybe 2014, and I really wasn't happy with how they went, and I felt like I kind of had to sort of restructure my approach because I was really just not happy about. I mean, I was able to get really good players, but I just was really not happy with pretty much everything about those gigs. So around 2016 is when I started leading my own band again. I think the first gig that I did was actually at Smoke because I had been playing there every Thursday for about, well, I guess it would turn out to be about 7 or 8 years with kind of like a jazz hip hop band called the Nickel and Dime Ops, and I made a lot of connections doing that late night gig. But so I started around 2016, and then after the pandemic, just basically trying to sort of workshop my bands regularly in New York, over a period of say 3 or 4 years, and then I kind of shifted to doing more touring, focusing more on getting out of the city just after the pandemic, a little bit before actually. For me, yeah, it's very challenging as a band leader because, and I like the opportunity to wear multiple hats, pretty much maybe even every hat, right? So, guitar player, composer, arranger, band leader, social media person, um, pretty much everything. And the one thing that I find difficult a lot of times is, if I'm leading a band at Zinc or something like that, or some other gig where it's like I need to make sure that I bring out a lot of people. Can I guarantee that the people that have promised me that are going to come out will show up? Oh no, the piano player is running late, or the drummer can't find parking. We're about to start. What's going on? I have to go make sure that I talk to these people that came and give them some FaceTime because, you know, like they took time. Maybe they had to get a babysitter to come out and see me if it's a couple or something. So I guess for me, the challenge is when I'm leading my own band is to juggle all of the responsibilities that one has as a independent artist in 2024, an independent jazz artist. And that's what's difficult for me is I'll have all these things going on in my head, and then I'm like, oh no, wait, now I have to play this challenging music that I wrote. I have to direct traffic. And I remember like one specific instance, for example, actually, this just occurred to me when I was leading a band at Smoke. This is, I think, when I first started back in like 2016. and I had mistakenly given like the wrong chart to the saxophone player, and they start playing the melody, and it's like like a minor third off or something. I'm like, oh
Oh,
no, and I'm
so
like,
it was like the same
yeah,
song, but just,
yeah.
transposed.
Well, what happened is, yeah, like again, it was a stupid mistake on my part. I gave them like a concert part when they should have had an E flat part, and it wasn't indicated on the chart because I did it kind of last minute or whatever. And I'm like, oh no, like not only did I make the melody of my tune sound like garbage, I threw this poor guy under the bus. And I was like, so stuff, just things like that that can happen. And I find just being over prepared, obviously, that minimizes that. But just juggling all of those things, and still being able to be happy with my performance as a guitar player, be happy with how the band interacted within the framework of the composition, improvisationally and collectively. I remember talking to Ben Monder about that a couple years ago, who I've been a huge fan of, and he's been supportive of some of my stuff, which I really appreciate. And I've gotten a lesson from him. I mean, I think he's one of the greatest guitar players. But I remember asking him about that, like just getting outside of your head when you're doing all of this stuff, and also trying to maintain the consistency. It's really hard to do that in this day and age. Like, there are few people that are lucky enough where they can be leading their own bands, own music, and touring so consistently where they can really develop that, and then also, not lose money, not bleed money, and also be able to get their head in a space so when it's time for them to say stuff on the mic, they're not like, like they can have a decent mic rep. They communicate with the audience. They acknowledge the audience. They're not uptight. They're making sure the band is comfortable so they can perform at their best. They're playing their parts well, all of those things. And I remember asking Ben Monder about that a couple of years ago, and he's like, it's really just the more you do it, it's just experience. It can't really be taught, I don't think, because there's just so many things that you're dealing with. You're on the road and everything's going good. You're running late to a gig. I remember my trio and we were going from Cincinnati to South Bend, Indiana a couple of years back, and there was like hurricane force winds, and my friend bass player was driving, and he was stressed out about that. And then, like you get into little arguments or little personal issues that happen that are sometimes out of your control. Maybe your drummer gets a call from his wife or his family member about something very stressful right before you're about to go on stage, and then that changes the vibe, and then it's the job of the band leader to negotiate. So basically just all of that stuff. I find that I like it the most. Like, I like leading my band the most, because there's so many challenges, and the challenges are exciting to me, but it is very, very difficult. Like, another instance I noticed. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, you're talking about all these little logistics and factors that
Yeah.
everyone sees all of the finished product on social media, or they'll
Right.
see the tour schedule, and they'll see,
Right.
and it looks, from the outside looking in, like, oh,
Hmm.
this person has it all, but you're talking about so many different factors: the traveling, the arranging of the
Yeah.
music, like organizing. You listed all those things, and then to finally get out of your head and not think
Yep.
about those things and play, that sounds like the most challenging thing. Yeah, you're
And
right.
and when you debrief, when you go back and you listen and you critique yourself, like my whole thing is I want it to be, and this was, I remember I had a lab with, and I remember hearing this from Mick Goodrick too when I was at Berkeley years ago, but from Mick and then also Wayne Krantz, the whole idea, because Mick really stressed the importance of when you're practicing or when you're playing duo, record yourself with a tape recorder and then listen back. And the idea is if it doesn't sound as good or better than anything you've ever heard, then you got your work cut out for it. You got your work cut out for you. And I remember the first time I was playing in a lesson duet with Mick years ago. We were just playing tunes or whatever. I recorded it and I took it home and I did reset. And I listened to it and I listened to his time feel and I'm like, wow, he sounds amazing. I never really noticed it like this. And then I listened to me and I'm like, I'm like, I sound horrible. I'm like, oh no. And then I realized, like he said, this is what I need to focus on. So the whole listening back is good. And to be able to, my goal, like when I'm listening back to a performance, I want to like be able to give it at least a B minus and be like, okay, I'll put my name by that, but sometimes you can't. It's funny, like funny story about that I was just thinking of. One gig a couple years ago, I was on the road. It was an important gig, had a lot of family, friends, students coming, and it was
Where was the
really
gig?
trying to remember exactly where it was. It might have been Chelsea Table and Stage.
Okay, in
I'm
the
not
city.
sure. Yeah, and I remember this one in particular. In particular, when they called me because I didn't have enough advance ticket sales, like a couple weeks out. And this is something I'm sure you probably noticed it too. They've been doing since the pandemic. It's like they and it's not just with the jazz venues. I've experienced this leading bands at Brooklyn Bowl in another genre, and it's like now it's like okay, they want to charge high ticket prices, and if you can't demonstrate enough advance sales, a lot of times they'll just cancel the show.
Oh yeah,
But
that
so
happened to someone I know on the day of their gig, and
yeah,
they were traveling from out of state.
yeah, it sucks. I mean, it's I think a post-pandemic thing. It's indicative that New York and a lot of the public performance world hasn't
It's a
properly
gut punch,
recovered.
but it's on them too to
Sucks.
promote. You know?
Totally. So this gig, Chelsea Table and Stage, I remember it had been kind of a long day. It was hot. It was a very hot day in the summer, and I hadn't had a whole lot to eat. And I had family coming, blah blah blah, stuff like that. I got to the gig early, getting set up. I think someone was running late in the band, and I had like one just to take my nerves off. I had like one whiskey, right? Just one drink to relax, and it was just a little bit too much.
Yeah, that happened to me a couple of weeks ago, so I get
Yeah,
it.
so it was a
One.
little like exactly like I hadn't eaten enough. I was hot. I was dehydrated, and it wasn't that I was like drunk at all. But when I went to play the first tune, I just felt a little bit distracted by it, and I was not happy. Like I felt like I couldn't settle in. It could have been just it was the first tune too, but and the funny thing is the performance overall of the ensemble and the band on the first tune was great. But for me, singling out myself, I was like, oh, it's kind of lackluster. But hey, that's part of it. That's a sincere document of what happened.
Yeah, and it's
You
just an
know?
innocent mistake. It's not like you're downing,
Right.
shots right before. It's just,
Right. Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
like,
It's just like
but those things can happen. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about. And
slight miscalibration, right?
yeah, we think we can handle so much, especially when you get older.
Totally.
So yeah, no, but let's talk a little bit about, your process. You went to Berkeley. I'm also a
Mhm.
Berkeley graduate. Berkeley is
Oh,
a very
great.
challenging school.
Yes.
Uh, did you enjoy the environment of being surrounded by all those musicians? Like, did you thrive on it, or was something where you said, okay, this is maybe I should really, step up my game and, just kind of put blinders on or something? Like, how did you approach Berkeley as, growing as an artist and learning?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'll be honest. So I got offered like a scholarship there when I was attending one of the summer guitar and bass workshops, and then I ended up going like the following
Yeah,
January.
what year were you? What year were you there, if you don't mind me asking?
I was there from 2001 to 2004, so a while
Okay.
ago.
Yeah,
But
a little before me, but it's still around the
yeah,
same time.
well, I mean, I'll tell you, I'll be honest. Like when I first went to the guitar and bass workshop, and I was coming from Pittsburgh, and I was in a very straight ahead mindset, very much into, my teacher in Pittsburgh, Joe Negri, who's still alive, God bless him, really great old school jazz guitar player, Italian, coming out of like, sort of Joe Pass and Herb Ellis, really old school guy.
Straight
Beautiful,
ahead.
like very straight ahead, super melodic, like he was sort of a child prodigy. I mean, he's I think 97, 98 now. He's up there, but he was playing with Shep Fields like I think in the late 30s or in the 40s. So he was playing in big bands in that era. And he was a TV star and things like that. So I was studying with him, and also Jimmy Ponder, of course, was an influence. But this sort of hard bop, straight ahead thing was really my wheelhouse when I went to Berkeley. And I had heard about Mick Goodrick from a great guitar player in Pittsburgh named Mark Lucas, who I remember seeing playing. And he had a very kind of modern concept that really blew my mind. And he told me about the book, The Advancing Guitarist by Mick Goodrick. So when I went to this summer guitar and bass workshop, I remember I had a chance to do a lab with Mick Goodrick, see him play. I got the advancing guitarist. And at the time when I heard Mick play, I really didn't, it was weird. It was almost like hearing another language. Like I really didn't understand what was going on. I remember hearing him playing trio with Bruce Gertz and Joe Hunt,
Whoa.
and they were playing like some Steve Swallow tunes, and I wasn't even hip to any of like that, more kind of international like ECM type stuff.
But it blew your
So
mind compared to like growing up with the straight ahead.
totally, it really did, Abe. And yeah, at first I wasn't sure if I liked it, whatever, but it really did blow my mind. And then when I did actually go to Berkeley, because I took a semester off, I gigged, I took some other classes. When I first got to Berkeley, I remember the first weekend, a friend of mine that I know from Pittsburgh, that we were in the same sort of student all-star like high school band. A guy named John Shannon, great guitar player who runs a great club in Pittsburgh, named Con Alma, great player, and I've kind of subbed for him on gigs over the past 20 years, so we've known each other forever, tours and gigs and stuff. I remember I knew he was there, and he had a fusion band called Waking Vision Trio. And the first weekend I was there, him and like a bunch of his friends and their band, they had a house out in Allston on Dustin Street. And I remember they had a party, and I went, and his band played, and then he invited some friends over, and they were playing free, very avant-garde. And I had never really seen anything like it, and I didn't really know what they were doing. Like, it was a real first time I was really exposed to an avant-garde approach and free jazz, and also like that type of fusion. And it really did kind of blow my mind. I was like, wow, this is really cool. And it was wild. Having said that, so that was great. But my first like semester at Berkeley, I kind of got in with pretty high ratings. And I remember I was in Cannonball Adderley Ensemble with Dave Hazelton. And
Wait, David Hazeltine taught the Cannibal Adderley
yeah,
Ensemble?
yeah,
You must have not
yeah,
been there when I was there. I don't remember seeing his name. That's awesome though. That's
yeah.
heavy.
He would come up from New York. So essentially for me, I remember there's a couple things that I had, like I felt like I was really in over my head, long story short. Like I had these high ratings and I felt like I was in ensembles with players. I thought that they thought I wasn't good enough to be there. No one ever really said that to me, but I felt that way. And I was also, for the first time, really trying to become disciplined and practice a lot. So I implemented this unrealistic, it turned out, practice regimen to try to do. But then I had some other classes, like I tested into ear training 4, which was just way too hard. It was way too much
Oh,
work.
that's wild. That's really
Yeah.
that's as good as it gets.
It was and I was like, wow, this is really like, we're like sight singing, like, Frank Zappa type melodies. And I'm like, this is really cool, but it's too much work. I was like, I like it, but it's just too much in one class. So then I switched to ear training 3, and I had a way more lax teacher, and that was kind of like a cakewalk. But long story short, Abe, I really burnt myself out first semester. I kind of got like depressed. I just felt like I wasn't good enough. I thought I was going to flunk out. I managed to do actually really well, but like I really got inside my own head. And then towards the end of that semester, like I literally had to take time off from playing. I went back to Pittsburgh. Like I don't think I touched my guitar for like a month. Then I started
Yeah,
to do gigs.
you're telling this story, and when I went to
Yeah.
Berkeley, I was living in the dorms. I met this guitar
Hmm.
player. His name was Henry. I don't
Hmm.
remember his last name. Like,
Hmm.
very very short kid. He played a
Hmm.
Telecaster.
Hmm.
He was like one of the most talented human beings I've ever met, you
Yeah.
know? And he just
Hmm.
disappeared after the first semester. Like he,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
because like the environment, and I totally get it. And I thought that was like,
Yeah.
I get it. I know what you're saying.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it was rough. I mean, honestly, because I remember I was staying in this. It was basically like it was this big old house out in Cleveland Circle area in Brighton, and it was me and Lynn. It was basically like a Boston College frat house. So
Oh
it was me
man.
and all these BC guys. So I was like kind of out of place, but it was cool. It was fun. But I kind of like I luckily I had sort of a big room, and towards the I started like January semester, and then towards the spring I was very kind of reclusive, and yeah, I was just really got really burnt out. And then I realized like, okay, I'm kind of, funny enough, like Dave Hazelton was actually really helpful for me. Like he kind of counseled me and stuff. He's like, look, like hang in there, you're going to be doing all right. He's like, you can cut it here. He was really cool. And, because I was just dealing with a lot of just the
No,
burnout.
I get it. Like when I went to Berkeley and one semester, like I went to visit some friends in Indiana and I just had so much
Yeah,
fun. I came back
yeah,
and it was like the first time I ever got depressed in my life, just because
yeah.
I saw I'm like, oh, this is what it's supposed to be like. You're supposed to have fun and when you're young. It's
No,
crazy.
exactly. And seeing, and again, I remember you may remember some of these people that were there, like some of the people that were like real, like highest rated guitar players that I remember seeing, like, of course, Waking Vision Trio with John Shannon, but David DeRushka, if you remember this guy, he was from, I think he was from Prague.
He's a guitar player?
Yeah, and he would have a trio with Peter Slavov, who's Bulgarian, I think, who's still active. Every time I remember
Oh
seeing
yeah,
that guy
yeah.
play.
I know.
A marvelous player, but I think it was David DeRushka, Peter Slavov, and the drummer might have been maybe Kendrick Scott. I'm not sure, and that was just a totally new, very European-based concept of playing, very motivic. But so seeing these players and just being kind of blown away by them, I was like, man, this is like kind of terrifying. But yeah, that was sort of my first semester, and then I was able to kind of like figure out a more healthy way to approach it and to approach the whole process like over the summer and then just gradually. And then one of the things I did in terms of like there were players that I wanted to play with and work with. And one
At
of the
Berkeley, you
things,
mean like just
yeah,
some students?
yeah. So, there was something that I just kind of fell into. Like in Pittsburgh, there were young players that I wanted to play with who were like around my same age, and they had the respect of like the black musicians, and so they could play with the older black cats, but they were also leading their bands and writing their own music. And one of the things that I did, and I kind of got to do this at Berkeley, like I had some teachers that encouraged writing my own stuff. So Mark White was one that encouraged me to do that. Rick Peckham was also really helpful with that. So I started writing my own music, and that kind of like attracted these other players to want to play with me. So I sort of used my composition as a way to put me in the vicinity of the players who I wanted to kick my ass so I could get better. And I did that in Pittsburgh, and then I also did it at Berkeley. And sort of by the time I left Berkeley, I had sort of made a lot of those connections that I still have today.
I mean, no, that's so cool to hear, and when you think about these things, it's like you come full circle, and like I think your
Yeah.
younger self would probably be very proud of all you've accomplished up to this point.
Well, hopefully, But yeah, thanks. I mean, it's interesting how it's weird how that stuff works. I think I remember hearing some story, something about some other player. There's some books that I read. Like, there's a really good like Berkeley book about like Berkeley players, and I remember reading this towards the end of my time at Berkeley, and it talked about like it's like Schofield and Frizzell and Emily Remler and people in film scoring and people in pop, and it was talking about like their time at Berkeley and after. And I remember like reading a thing about Emily Remler, and she was like, at first my goal was I just wanted to have a gig where I played standards every week, and then my goal was this. And I remember for me specifically after Berkeley, because I had a Hal Crook ensemble, which was great, but it really kind of Hal Crook was awesome. He was very loving, very supportive, but he could be harsh in a way that was very kind of like, at least with me, it was very like loving, but it really kind of it was hard, right? So he was kind of like, you got to get your straight ahead playing together. I don't think your straight ahead shits together. And I'm like, oh man. And so then he's like, you got to transcribe Cannonball, you got to transcribe Red Garland, listen to them, transcribe them. He's like, yeah, your time feel is blah, you got to work on this. So that kind of, really affected me. And one of the things that I wanted to do after Berkeley is I'm like, I need to find a way where I'm playing straight ahead every day for pay. And then that led me about 2 years later after I left Boston to leading jazz trios on ships. And that was able to get my time feel, my repertoire, and also my sort of harmonic playing
Which cruise
together.
line did you work for? I worked on cruise ships too.
Yeah, no, it's great. So there were guys that I met at Berkeley who had done that, and I was like, okay, because it's not like the 50s or 60s anymore, and there's no more gigs, we got to try to recreate this environment in the real world, and that was one of the only places. So initially, and again, it literally took me. This is back like 20 years ago. It took like literally calling and emailing this guy like almost every day for a long time, like being up this dude's ass. But first, I was leading jazz trios with Carnival. And I did
The fun ship, I was with them too.
exactly. Yeah, no, it was cool. Like I had a 6-month contract on the Legend, 6 month on the Triumph, and then like a 3 month on the Destiny, and then they took that position, the Jazz Trio position, off of that class of ship. But it was weird. That was crazy because I remember trying to get like my first two contracts. The very first one, I was with a really great drummer from Pittsburgh named Andrew Kirk, who I just toured with this past year, and I tour with him a lot when I come through the Midwest. The bass player that we got failed. Like I had a couple bass players lined up from New York. They failed the medical. So we ended up doing like the first 3 months just as a duo. And then
Wow.
finally we got a bass player who was like a guitar player, nice guy, but it wasn't the same type of thing. So we had developed this thing where we're playing like 4 hours of tunes a day, me walking bass lines, trading solos over all kinds of stuff for like months. And we
Yeah,
had a thing going
that's
on.
like boot camp. Duo with
Yeah, it was cool.
drums.
Yeah, I mean, I've always liked that. Like one of my first records was a duet record with Bob Moses that I recorded in 2005, and essentially some friends of mine from Berkeley that were working with him, uh, you know, I came to see them playing with him, and then I did a gig. I called him for a gig, and then he suggested that just him and me play duet. So we did that, and then we recorded this sort of free album called Forces of the Wild. So it's like for me, and I remember also when I was at Berkeley, there was a great drummer from Switzerland named Sam Dusler who recorded on one of my albums back in school. And he had a rehearsal space near where I was living when I was living near Fenway. And I would just go meet him and we would just play duet. Like we would play tunes and we'd play free. So I've always loved playing with drums. And I remember hearing like Bob Moses say, he's like, yeah, man, I got the whole universe right here. That's all you need. All the sounds, all the tones, there's harmonies there. So just, I always approach like when you're listening to the drums, like of hearing like harmonies, forms, melodies kind of emerging out of the drum kit and out of what the drummer's playing. And also, I mean, as of course, playing with a great drummer, you're just going to get so many really sophisticated rhythmic ideas that you're going to get to interact with, and then that's going to make you play or sort of facilitate you to play in a way that you've never played before. And just so the idea of dialoguing with drums, I remember doing the Lovano ensemble at Berkeley. Like he would talk about like playing through the ensemble. Like he'd like be playing like a monk tune, and he'd play a line through the ensemble, and like Paul Motion and Mark Johnson, they would react to it, and then they would sort of like develop something that he did and then send it back to him, like a true conversation, dialoguing. And that whole idea of like playing through, and so it's really like, it's like communication is non, like no communication is non-negotiable. We're going to be having a conversation. So that idea I always thought was really cool. And I always feel like great drummers, especially jazz drummers, they listen so much. And for me, that's always been really exciting. So getting to play duet with drums on a cruise ship out of necessity was a great experience. And then the same thing happened my second contract. Had another great bass player. This was a drummer I didn't know who I like auditioned and got. And so our vibe wasn't as good. But yeah, we had to play, again, duet for 6 weeks. And then we got a bass player who was kind of a little really hard to work with. He was kind of, aggressive and very temperamental. So that was difficult. But yeah, I mean, it was an interesting experience. Like I learned a lot about band leading doing that. I learned a lot about just, how to lead a band and
Like I
your
said, I think it's
personalities.
it's a boot camp essentially. Just to be
Yeah.
playing that much time. But
Yeah, for sure.
Andy, this has been great, and I'm glad we got a chance to connect. And yeah, I really like
Yeah,
hearing your stories and what shapes
sure.
your journey and everything. So we'll definitely have to do it again. Where can everybody find you in terms of your website, social media, all that stuff, where we could share it?
Yeah, great. So thank you so much, Abe. AndyBianco.com. So my website, so that has my touring dates, just pretty much everything, my albums, things like that. You can get hard copies of my 4 official album releases. I have a new album out, a new live album out called Live on a Midsummer Night in NYC with my organ quartet, sort of pushing that a little bit. And yeah, I mean, everything will just be up at my website. And I got some tentative bookings for the summer and also for the winter, trying to get that going. But my website is definitely the place. Also, just Andy Bianco Music on Facebook, and just Andy Bianco on regular Facebook, just for me. But so
Beautiful.
yeah, that's where you can find it. And Instagram too, Bianco Andy. Sorry, at Bianco Andy.